Hi, Mike Cannell here with Orcas Island Leather Goods, and today we're going to assemble our Rosario clutch. Our kit comes with all the leather, hardware, and stitching supplies you'll need. From home, you will need scissors to cut the thread, a lighter, and pliers can also come in handy. In your kit, you'll find 7 pieces of leather. The main clutch bridle piece, the hand strap, the main wallet piece, the upper card pocket, the lower card pocket, and the 2 gussets. To assemble the clutch, we'll first add the upper card pocket with these 2 stitch lines here. Then add the bottom card pocket using this vertical stitch line in the middle of the card wallet. Then we'll flip over the main bridle piece and add the wallet to the interior of the clutch using this stitch line across the body. Next we'll add the gussets one at a time. And then lastly, after the gussets are stitched in, we'll turn the clutch over and add the hand strap to the back of the clutch using the gusset stitching holes. Now, let's get started. The first step is to assemble the card holders and wallet from these 3 pieces. We'll set the bottom card pocket piece aside for now and begin by stitching the upper card stops on each side. Align the stitching holes. I'm using a stitching pony to hold the separate pieces of leather together. Alternatively, you can use something like a binder clip to keep everything aligned. We'll start with about 14 inches of thread and thread both needles. Pass one needle through both pieces of leather and even out the thread lengths. First needle through the face side of the leather in the next stitching hole. Pull the thread back and away. Second needle through from the back side and pull the stitches tight. We'll repeat this to the end of the stitch line. At the end, we'll backstitch 1.5 stitches so we have both threads on the back side of the piece. Normally we will do 2.5 back stitches, however it's fine to do 1.5 here as there won't be any stress on this seam. Alright, let's flip this around, clip those threads to about 1/8 of an inch, and then melt the thread ends and press them into the stitch line. Be sure to just melt the ends and not burn the leather or the thread. I'll flip this around again and let's stitch the other side just as we did the first. First needle through, even out the threads, one needle through, pull that thread back and away, backside needle through the same hole, and pull that stitch tight. We're going to repeat this all the way down until we get to the end. Now let's backstitch 1.5 stitches so we have both sides on the back. Clip those threads and melt the ends. Since we don't want cards to catch on the stitches, let's flatten them out with a round, smooth object. I'm using a lighter, but a Sharpie or something similar will work just as fine. Next, we'll attach the bottom card pockets by stitching down the center line. The upper card pockets are already attached, and you'll need to ensure you add the bottom card pocket correctly. You will have 4 stitching holes visible on the upper card pocket, and the long stitch line at the bottom will line up with the main pocket piece. We begin this stitch in the first stitching hole of the upper card pocket. Then 1 stitch into the half hole on the main wallet piece to essentially do a back stitch, and then we will stitch forward to the end of the stitch line. First needle through, pull the threads back and away, then the second needle through the same hole, pull tight, and repeat. Here we will add the bottom pocket to the stitch line. A little clip, especially the rubber coated ones, can come in handy when you need to hold multiple pieces of leather together. You'll notice this stitch line does not connect with the long stitch line on the bottom of the card pocket. Now we'll backstitch, and again 1.5 back stitches is fine here, as there won't be any stress on this stitch line. And I'll flip this around and we can clip the threads, then melt and press the ends into the stitch line. The next step will be to attach the wallet insert to the main clutch bridle leather using the long horizontal stitch line. The wallet and bridle leather attach with the back sides together and the face sides point in opposite directions. This is a great time to fold the main bridle piece into the final clutch shape and double check that everything makes sense and is where it belongs. Begin by passing one needle through the first hole and then even out the thread ends. Then saddle stitch forward to the end of the stitch line. Face needle through, pull those threads back and out of the way, and then the second needle through the same hole. Now that we're at the end of the stitch line, we're going to pull those threads nice and tight, and then backstitch 2.5 stitches, clip the thread ends, and melt them into the stitch line. The only thing left to stitch are the gussets, which will look like this. Align the stitching holes on one side of the gusset with the card pocket stitching holes. The gusset should have the face side up just like the card pocket. The top stitching hole will match with the top card pocket, and there will be an extra half hole in the bridle leather. Begin by passing one needle through the third stitching hole in the bridle leather. That's the second hole on the gusset and card pocket. Even out your threads and then do 2 stitches to the half hole. This half hole is used just to reinforce the top of this gusset, and the stitch will go only through the main piece of bridle leather. Now stitch forward to where the gusset begins to curve. I find it easier to stitch gussets without using the stitching pony, so let's take this out. You can use a clip to help hold the leather in place while stitching. Be sure the clip has a rubber coating so it doesn't mar the leather. For this clutch, there are only 3 stitching holes for the turn of the gusset. Go slowly, making sure to keep the holes aligned. If it is easier, you can pass the needle through one layer of leather at a time. Just make sure to keep those stitches tight. Notice how I pull the first thread backwards while the second needle is still in the stitching hole? This is to check to see if the second needle pierced the thread. This is a quick and easy way to ensure you have not pierced a thread with your second needle. Once you're finished with the curve of the gusset, then simply stitch straight down that stitch line until we get to the end. Do a full stitch in the last hole, and then we are going to loop a stitch over the top and go back into the same stitching hole. Be sure to keep the threads lined up as I go over the top of the edges to help hold them in place. Snug those threads up nice and tight, and then 2.5 back stitches, clip the threads, and melt the ends. Now that we've finished the first gusset, take the second gusset piece, line it up with the inside pocket on the other side, and make sure to have the face or the good side of the leather facing the same direction as the pocket. Begin your stitch with the third hole in the outside bridle leather and stitch 2 stitches to the half hole on top. Then stitch forward as we did on the other side to the turn of the gusset. Take your time when stitching the curve of the gusset to ensure you keep the stitching holes aligned and you do not pierce your thread. And now we're just going to stitch all the way to the end of the gusset line. Just as we did on the other side, we're going to loop this last stitch over the top and go back into the same stitching hole. Be sure to keep the threads lined up as they go over the top edges. Now 2.5 back stitches, clip those thread ends and melt them into the stitch line, and we're going to be done with the main part of the clutch. The last step is to add the hand strap to the back of the clutch. As we will be using the existing stitching holes, the needles and thread will be more difficult to pull through when stitching. I highly recommend having a pair of pliers to give you a little more leverage. Begin by counting 5 holes from the top of the clutch, and the 6th hole is where we will begin our stitch for the hand strap. Pass one needle through the top hole of the clutch strap and through the 6th hole of the clutch. Then make one stitch towards the top of the clutch. This stitch is only through the main clutch. Then stitch down the strap stitch line and again go one hole past the clutch strap. We'll finish this side by back stitching, clipping the threads, and again melting them into the stitch line. The back stitching will be the most difficult, as the stitching holes on this clutch will now have 6 threads through them. We'll repeat the same steps on the other side. Count 5 holes down the clutch and begin your stitch through the hand strap on the 6th hole. 1 stitch towards the top of the clutch to reinforce the top side, and then stitch down over the strap until you go 1 hole past the strap holes. Be sure to use those pliers to help if you need them. Let's backstitch, clip those thread ends, and melt the threads, and we're done. All that's left is to sand and burnish your edges if you prefer, so be sure to watch our burnishing video. I hope you enjoyed making this clutch. From our family to yours, happy making!